Ted Conover is a Pulitzer Prize finalist and a National Books Critics Circle award-winning author. His latest is Cheap Land, Colorado. In the book, where along with independence and stunning views come fierce winds, neighbors with criminal pasts, and minimal government and medical services. In May of 2017, Ted went to Colorado to explore firsthand a rural way of life that is about living cheaply on your own land and keeping clear of the mainstream. The failed subdivisions of the enormous San Luis Valley make this possible. 5-acre lots on the high prairie can be had for just $5,000, sometimes less. Again, the name of the book is Cheap Land, Colorado. Ted Conover is the author, and we welcome him to the roundtable this morning. Ted, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks a lot, Joe.
What brought you to the subject?
So I'm from Colorado, and when I learned that people were living out there in the middle of nowhere in this extremely bare bones way, not sort of up in the hills with nice off-grid houses, but really sort of just by a shoestring in sheds and old RVs, I thought, wow, that is really interesting. And I wonder who is living like that and why.
As you started to look into this and uncover this, when did you realize that was a group that you could identify, that there was a commonality here?
Pretty early on. A sister of mine who lives in Colorado, I grew up there, sent me some photos from a visit she'd made to a group called La Puente in Alamosa, Colorado. And La Puente started off as a rural homeless shelter for this giant valley called the San Luis Valley. It's about the size of New Jersey. And people in the valley tend to live around its edges where there are trees and mountains. But there's this vast space in the middle, much of which has been divided into 5-acre lots. That happened mostly in the 1970s. And this group La Puente had become aware that people were trying to live out there on these lots now, which they had seldom ever done, and sort of often failing at that, especially when the weather gets cold, because it's a super cold part of the country, and it's hard to keep a little place heated. And people would end up in the shelter, and they thought, how could we help them instead to stay where they are? And they came up with a program that offers firewood and propane and various assistance. And I saw that whoever was involved in that would have a lot of contact with these folks. And I ended up meeting them and then volunteering to do it myself.
We'll get to that part in a moment. But one of the points that I think is important to make at the beginning here, all have chosen to live here. This is a choice that people have made.
Exactly. And that's truly a key part of it. You can think, oh, it's terrible, somebody should have to live like that. But what makes it really different from that scenario is that, yes, this is a decision somebody made to try to be self-sufficient despite many odds against it. And I think the allure is ownership. It's being able to own your own land. My book's called Cheap Land, Colorado, because it's some of the cheapest land in the country. You can get 5 acres for $5,000, sometimes a little less. And, there's lots of asterisks attached to this. You probably won't be able to sell the land for that much because there's an oversupply of these lots. There's like 45,000 of them out there, maybe just a few hundred people so far living this way. And then there's expenses for things like a septic system, which the county requires. And then you've got to figure out how to get water. How are you going to make a living? There aren't many jobs. And so, yeah, there's all kinds of odds against success. But people keep trying. I just thought, wow, this is kind of like the frontier, and it's kind of something new, and it would be worth learning about firsthand if I could do that.
When you pay your $5,000 or whatever it is, who does that money go to?
Often it's a private party that, bought the land before you, maybe back in the 70s, and has been paying taxes on it. $49 a year is a pretty typical amount for tax. But sometimes it's the county itself, because people stop paying this tax, and then the county ends up taking ownership of the lot. So that's the scenario. Originally these were big ranches, and when the whole idea of mail order land sales became popular in the 70s, that's when it caught on, and the people who sold these lots were actually fined by the Federal Trade Commission back in the 70s for deceiving their sellers, and they lumped them together with those who would sell lots in the Everglades. There's that whole time in history when that was a thing, but few people took them up on the offer of a refund. It seems people kind of knew they were getting a piece of land that was going to be hard to live on, or maybe hard to sell. But, owning land is a pretty special thing. And this is about the only way you could do it without money down, or without more than, say, $50 down, and then $50 a month to keep up your payments.
Ted Conover is our guest. The name of the book is Cheap Land, Colorado. So 2017, in May of that year, you leave New York City and you go to join them, and you begin by volunteering.
Exactly. I mean, I thought I could just go out there and try to set up a little homestead, but it'd be better to, it could be a better way to meet people if I were doing some good along the way, and it would probably bring me greater success in meeting people, because a lot of people they're there because they don't want to meet people, right? They kind of like being in the middle of nowhere, and get worried when a truck they don't recognize pulls up at their gate or the end of their road, and so, I took lessons from a La Puente employee named Matt Little, who'd been doing this for a few months, and he taught me some helpful rules, such as don't wear any shirt or jacket that's blue, because that's the color that the county code inspectors wear, and you don't want to be mistaken for them. And, don't be aggressive in any way when you approach somebody's place. Tap your horn from out on the road, roll down your window, get out of the truck so they can see who you are. And Matt wore a hooded sweatshirt with the La Puente logo on it and had a magnetic door sign that identified him. And he set me up with those same things, and I would, like him, offer some free firewood. I had some in the back. I'd ask if there's any prescriptions I needed help with, getting picked up in town. There's people with all kinds of health issues, and they run out of money for gas, so they can't drive to the pharmacy. There's diabetics who don't have their insulin. There's just, as with any group of low-income people, there's a lot of needs, and when you live remotely like that, you do not always have the means to attend to those. So I'd meet people. Often they'd say they don't need any help at all. And but sometimes I'd get to talk to them a bit, get to know them a bit. I'd say, hey, by the way, I'm a writer. Believe it or not, I live in New York, and I think people are interested in how you live, and I wonder if I could talk to you more about it sometime. And often people would say, yeah. So that sort of got me started.
When you spoke a moment ago of having identification on the truck or on a hoodie, what was the concern of people if you showed up and you didn't have those?
Well, one concern they have is robbery because, there's very little government out there. The sheriff's office can take a long time to respond, if you can even reach them, because even if you have a cell phone, it may not have a signal. And so they are nervous about being robbed of, anything. But in particular, it's legal to grow marijuana out there, and many do. And when the plants get big, they're worth a lot of money, like $1,000 for a plant. And so Matt would tell me if there's an American flag flying out front, you can assume they've got a firearm. And a lot of people have dogs just for security. And so, they'd be worried about potentially revealing to a stranger that they have something of value. I think that's the biggest fear.
Let's take marijuana as an example. It is of value. Does it stay within the community or does it go out?
I bet you most of it stays in the community. It's used for barter. If I need help with a roof or a fence, I might give you a quarter ounce or even an ounce if you help me a lot. There aren't many restaurants out there, but there was one where a guy I know washed dishes and he'd be paid partly in cash and partly in marijuana. That place has gone out of business, so I'm not worried about getting them in trouble. But it becomes a kind of currency. And I never expected that. So, there are dispensaries around the edges of the valley where you can buy weed in a store, but not many of the prairie people do that.
What about alcohol?
So alcohol is a huge problem. And addiction to various substances is a big deal out there. There's meth, there's opiates, just a huge amount of opiates were sort of unloaded on this valley by pharmaceutical companies during that crisis. Fentanyl is, of course, a growing thing. And that's one of those are all reasons that it's not exactly bucolic, right? It's incredibly beautiful, but the human presence there, it's both a reason for joy and concern.
You were part of this community for parts of 4 years. You did eventually buy your own land. At what point? And I'm assuming I'm just doing the math in my head, but it's you do this pretty much till the start of the pandemic, right?
So actually, I started. I bought my land in late 2017.
Yeah.
And then, the pandemic comes in early 2020. And so my last year and a half there, 2 years, are during the pandemic. And so that was super interesting, too, just because there's a lot of skepticism out there, as in so much of the United States, about the gravity of the pandemic and the need to mask up or vaccinate. And so I did, even though it's my home state, I did feel in certain ways that I was in this culture kind of foreign to me. But that's what I wanted. I wanted to get out of my journalist silo and understand why people believe some of these things, and that sort of different reality that we know different Americans live in.
Is it overtly political, or the opposite, where it's just anti-government and not so much, let's say, a red or Trump value?
It's both. It's both. Some people are really partisan and really, hearing I'm from New York or I'm a journalist. I mean, I've got all these strikes against me. Try to, bait me into some sort of argument, and others are just, calling it like they see it. They, the Democrats haven't thought about people like me for years, and by people like me, I'm probably talking to a white person who did or did not finish high school and may have served in the military. There's a high chance of that. There's a lot of veterans out there, and has had trouble getting by in the United States in recent years, and blames people in power for forgetting people like them. I had never really understood the depth of people's disaffection with Hillary Clinton until I was out there and could, why Hillary? And boy, just say that and you'll be listening for half an hour to somebody.
It's articulated. Yeah.
Exactly.
Is it a sense, and this goes back, I guess, to an earlier question that I asked you of making the point that all have chosen to live there. So is there a want of mobility or an ease and a comfort of where they are?
Do you mean, are they stuck there?
Yeah. I mean, is there a thought that they want a better life, they want a different life, or is there a comfort of where they are that yes, we're doing this, but the reason we're doing this is because we want to be left the hell alone?
Huh. I'd say it's more the first thing you said. There's definitely people who want to be left the hell alone and have no use for government and, have basically a libertarian outlook on life. But there are other people like the Gruber family who were the first ones I lived with out there. They rented me a little corner of their 5-acre lot. Mom and dad, 5 daughters being homeschooled. They came from Wyoming. Actually, after they left Wyoming, they lived in New Mexico and Colorado, outside Denver for a while. The dad did various jobs. The last one was house painting, and then he got cancer, and couldn't do that work. And their mom had her hands full, and they just decided, well, let's move to a place where our expenses are low, and we'll find a way to get by. And so that's how they ended up down there. They sort of withdrew from the market economy, I guess you could say. And with this idea that they'd no longer have to pay rent or utility bills, they set to figuring out, okay, how are we going to get electricity? Well, we've got solar panels. Maybe we can get maybe we can get propane in that old tank that our neighbor is willing to sell us. But it's a hard life, and things go wrong, and the truck stops working, and they can no longer get into town. And I think they've had some second thoughts over the years about whether this was a good move. But most often, if you are talking to them, they'll say, we're prairie people now. This is our home. It's one of the most beautiful places on earth, and we're going to stay. So yeah, there's this. It's like a choice for self-determination, right? They're making a statement that they are done with what they're supposed to be doing, but then so often they find it's rough.
The book comes out. Are people able to get it in the community, and do they want to read it?
Yeah, so even before the book came out, I wrote a long article in Harper's Magazine about this and brought 24 copies out there and gave them to everybody, because it's important when you are becoming part of a community and you're a weirdo like me to try and let people see what you're up to. And, I was as scrupulous as I could be in getting everybody's story straight. And I think after that, most people thought they'd still talk to me. And a couple came out of the woodwork and said, you didn't put people, you say that's with PTSD, there's people with outstanding warrants, there's people with addiction, but you didn't talk about people like me. And I'm like, okay, well, tell me. And so I learned about another neighbor of mine who just became unemployed. Wife killed herself. He lost his house. He lost his life. And he just said, I just came to a place where I could just get by. He's a Navy veteran, so he gets a pension. And but yeah, he said, I'm here because everything went wrong. And then, that really adds an important angle, this idea of failing to live up to, failing to find the kind of life you thought you could make.
Right.
And a lot of people are in that boat, and a lot of them sort of end up out there. But fast forward to answer your question, before the book came out, I took the advanced copies I got, and again, I walked around or drove around, gave them to people, and said, if you're on social media or whatever, be ready for people discovering you and maybe wanting to connect, and you're going to be out there even more than after my article came out. So far, it's okay. Knock wood. I feel kind of protective, but I keep. And the thing is, I haven't left. I still have my place, and I like going there. So I'm hopeful I'll still be able to when some of the dust settles.
The name of the book is Cheap Land, Colorado, Off-Gridders at America's Edge. The book is published by Knopf. Ted Conover, I thank you very much for sharing with us this morning. A great pleasure to have you on the program.
Appreciate your questions. Thanks, Joe.
Be well. Thank you. Again, Cheap Land, Colorado is the name of the book. Ted Conover is the author, published by Knopf. You're listening to The Roundtable.